everybody. Thank you for spending your lunchtime with me, and thank you for attending my session, Decluttering Your Org, Steps to a More Optimized Salesforce. You might be in the audience today thinking to yourself, my org is a complete mess. Well, let me assure you, you've come to the right session today. You're in the right place. Let's get started. Of course, with our most famous slide, the forward-looking statement slide. Salesforce is a publicly traded company. Please make all of your purchasing decisions on publicly available information. So my name is Christopher Marzilli. I work in platform success here at Salesforce. I've worked here for 5 years. For 10 years before that, I was both a customer and a partner, and I literally made my bones on taking orgs that were old, out of date, riddled with technical debt, and revamping them to make them more user-friendly and make them easier for admins and developers to build and extend. And through that time, I developed a very simple 3-step process for decluttering an org. It's really simple, but I want to take you through the steps and then provide you some of the best tips and tricks that I've come across so that you can use them in your projects. So step 1, you have to assess your org and understand what state is that in. That's actually the most amount of work goes into step 1, is doing that assessment. Salesforce is an incredibly powerful tool, but as veteran administrators know, it can be difficult to keep those features maintained across your org. Step 2 is you develop your corrective action. And there's a couple different ways that I've developed corrective action project plans, and we'll talk about the different options you have available to you. And then step 3 is you put in action, you execute on your plan. This is where we'll get down to how to build that project, how to get buy-in from stakeholders, and also some additional tips and tricks that you need to think about when you put your plan in action. So let's get into it. Step 1, assessing your org. So what are we doing in step 1? We're going to review your org and determine the amount of technical debt that exists. Okay? So technical debt, let's just define that term, because I don't know if everybody's familiar with technical debt. Technical debt was a phrase coined by Ward Cunningham. Ward Cunningham is a very famous developer and author from America. He refers to a design approach where best practices hasn't been used in the short run, creating a context in which the same amount of work it will cost more in the long run. In terms of Salesforce, Ward, when he developed it, he was mostly thinking about code for technical debt, but in the terms of Salesforce, it's a combination of inefficient customizations, integrations, and processes that grow unchecked over time, resulting in a system that lacks ability, usability, and agility. Many of you out in the audience who have orgs that are very cluttered with customizations probably suffer from low user adoption because they don't know how to use the app. There's too much there for them to consume. Some of you might have difficulty deploying new features because old features break whenever you deploy anything. Your org has become very brittle. Or if you have to make changes to your org, it could be very difficult to make a change to a field because there's so much other stuff built on top of that. That's what we would consider technical debt. So when you think about assessing your org, you got to be honest with yourself and say to yourself, which one looks very familiar to you? Do you have this nice, optimized lightning layout that's very simple for a user to comprehend and understand? Or do you have this guy over here that has the long list of fields and related pages that I can't even fit on the screen? It actually came down all the way down to here. All right? I don't know any user who could look at this and comprehend, what to do with this record or this page. So this is Cody here throwing a little shade at you guys if this is what you have over here on the left. So hopefully by the end of today's session, we'll get you over here on my right. All right, so let's get specific about technical debt and what technical debt looks like in Salesforce. There's a number of areas of technical debt that we need to talk about, and those areas affect quality, adoption, complexity, performance limits, testing, and training. The biggest area of technical debt has to do with one of our most powerful feature, that's custom objects and fields, all right? These tend to grow unchecked. People tend to add fields almost on a whim. And also, you might have inherited orgs that were managed by other admins, and those admins inherited that org from other admins who inherited it from other admins, and they keep adding more and more fields without ever evaluating whether they needed the fields that already exist. So custom fields kind of cut across that. But there's also custom tabs and apps. If you have a lot of tabs and apps, it can be very confusing to the user. It adds a lot of complexity. It can really hurt adoption. Page layouts and record types can be very difficult, not so much for end users, but for administrators to maintain over time. It can be if you have a lot of different page layouts and a lot of different record types, there's that big matrix of who sees what when. It can really deal with a lot of complexity for admins when they have to make updates and try to find the exact page layout with the exact record type. Workflow and validation rules, these can cause a lot of complexity in your system. In fact, sometimes you might make a change to a workflow rule. It might actually break an Apex trigger. You have a very brittle Salesforce org if that's the case. Installed packages. I've worked with a lot of customers that, like they love to go out on the AppExchange and download all of these free and paid for apps, and they might look at them and then end up not using them. Sometimes they don't get deleted. That can actually really hurt you as far as that's there, users can see it, or admins have to kind of work around it. You want to make sure you move those out. Obviously, Apex code and Visual Force pages make up a lot of technical debt in Salesforce. I've been told there's something like 200 million Visual Force pages out there in the world, but only 20 million get used every month. So that's a pretty high amount of technical debt in Visual Force. Obviously, Apex code can drive a lot of technical debt. There was probably a lot of Apex code that was written 10 years ago that now in Lightning wouldn't even be necessary because we have those features available for you out of the box. Reports and dashboards become a significant area of technical debt, specifically around user adoption. If a user can't find the report that they're looking for within about 35 to 45 seconds, you know what they're going to do? They're going to create another report. And then know what you have? Yet another report in your system. All right? So this is going to really affect adoption, and people will keep creating the same reports over and over again, and then not even referencing them and sharing them with each other. Roles and profiles, again, this is more admin focused. It really can increase complexity and having you maintain security rules between the roles and profiles. It also can affect your limits. And also, it really hurts you when you try to go and test in training. If you have a lot of different roles and a lot of different profiles, you have to do a lot of different testing and regression testing every time you go to deploy on Salesforce. So those are some of the key areas of technical debt in Salesforce. It's certainly by no means the limit. It's just the beginning of those areas. So let's talk about how what we can use to start assessing those areas of technical debt. So the first place I always go when I start thinking about how to assess technical debt is I start in setup. And I'll look at setup overview. All right, this will give you a very high level of what's being used. You get some high level of what limits you might be close to, custom field limits, data limits, end user limits. It'll just kind of give you that quick overview. I also like to check out Schema Builder. Uh-oh. That's not good. We back? Okay, we're back. All right, so I like to check out Schema Builder. This is where you can look at how your objects are all related to each other. You can add and remove objects to the pane. I like to put all objects on there to see what kind of tangle web they've weaved in their org. I also like to see if there's any custom objects or objects that are off by itself with not related to anything. That's a good indication that that object might not be used anymore or was never fully integrated into a business process. The security health check is actually another good place I always like to see. It lets me know what features they're using or not using. If they're not using, for example, two-factor authentication, it's probably a good indication that maybe the admin hasn't been keeping up to date with new features, because two-factor authentication is free for everybody if you're a Salesforce customer, and you really should be using it because it's pretty much the standard in the security world nowadays. And then there's also reports and dashboards. Is a good way. You can actually run reports on objects to see when the last time an object was created or when the last time a field was accessed. But you can also run reports on reports. A lot of people don't know that. You can create a report on reports to see the last time a report was run. This is great. If I run these reports, I say, show me all the reports that haven't been run in a year. If they have 10,000 reports, probably 9,000 of them will come up on that list. So you know if a report hasn't been run in a year, probably doesn't need to be in the system because no one's using it. You do want to be careful. Just a quick tip on the reports on reports. You'll get that list of reports. You'll look at the ones that haven't been run in a year. You might click on it, right, to see what's in that report. Guess what happens when you click on it? It updates the last run date. So once you run that report on reports, export it first, and then start drilling into the reports and see what they're looking at. Yeah, that one gets you. All right. Those are some great tools in setup. There's one other tool that I want to talk about in setup at length. It's called the Salesforce Optimizer. Anybody here familiar with the Salesforce Optimizer? All right, about a third. Okay, this is like the tool. All right, Salesforce, again, super complex, can be really hard to maintain. The Salesforce Optimizer tool is a tool that we built that really takes the guesswork for admins out of how to maintain Salesforce. It's going to show you, it looks at about 100 plus different metrics and features in Salesforce, lets you know what you're using, what maybe you're overusing, what you're not using. You can access it through setup. When you go into setup, just type Optimizer, you'll find it there. You click a button, it'll run a report. It'll send you that report a few minutes later in a PDF, and you have that forever. It'll also upload it into files in Salesforce. So you have it both in your email and also in Salesforce. You can go through the report at your leisure. I would highly recommend that before you leave the Bay Area today, if you feel like you have an org with a lot of clutter, hit that optimizer button, so that way when you get home tomorrow, that report's in your inbox and you can take a look at it. It'll show you things, if you're hitting limits, like around custom fields. It'll let you know if fields aren't being utilized. It'll also let you know if there's things in your org that you don't need, like unused roles or unused profiles. I worked with a company that had 1,000 users and 5,000 roles. That makes no sense, all right? So the optimizer will point that out, and it'll actually show you a lot of low-hanging fruit. And then it'll also point out other things like features you aren't using, like that you could be using, again like two-factor authentication. It'll also show you unused workflow rules and inactive workflow rules and inactive validation rules. If they're inactive and you're not using them anymore, remove them from your system. They're just technical debt, waiting for someone to accidentally trip up and activate them when they don't need to be activated. I also recommend with the optimizer report, we're updating that report all the time. We're not necessarily because it's actually built on the Heroku platform, we're not tied to the 3 releases a year of Salesforce, so we're updating the optimizer all the time. So I would actually recommend that not only do you run it once at the start of your assessment, you also run it quarterly. So that way you can track how you're doing, and you can get new insights as we add more features to Optimizer. Like I said, it's about 120 different data points that it looks at, but that's going to grow over time. So do run that Optimizer. This is just an incredible tool that takes a lot of the guesswork out of maintaining your org. And again, not only will it show you things that you're not using, as far as roles and profiles, but it'll show you features that you might have not even knew existed that can now be enabled, and you can probably deprecate some code or some workflow that you no longer need. So Optimizer is the tool to use. Now, those are some of the tools that Salesforce provides. I want to talk about some of the third-party tools that are out there, and there are a ton of third-party tools out there. The first one I'll talk about is something called the Toolkit for Salesforce. You can just Google that. This was made by a developer. There's a whole bunch of different tools in here. The one that's probably most relevant to ours is the Org Doctor. It's actually very similar to the Optimizer. Has a little bit, reports on a little bit different set of metrics. There's some overlap. Has some nice visualizations that maybe we don't have on the Optimizer, but it's a really nice tool. Definitely check it out. Great tool. It's free, and it uses OAuth, so that's even better. Another super popular tool, this tool's been around for a really long time, is Field Trip. That's in the AppExchange. You can find it in the AppExchange. This will be able to run you a report to show you the field utilization. All right? And field utilization is really important, especially when you're evaluating, should I remove this field or not? Field utilization is going to tell you how often that field is being used. So, and Field Trip has been around for a really long time. Another tool, this is a newer tool called Elements Catalyst. This is another tool you can find out on the AppExchange. This has some really cool features. It can do a full org analysis, very similar to the Optimizer. One of the really cool things I like about this tool is that it provides a Chrome plugin, so that when you go into setup and you start looking at some stuff in setup and objects, it can actually give you kind of the breakdown of the field usage right on that page. This might look like it's coming from Salesforce, but actually through the Chrome plugin, they're throwing it up here with you. So you can kind of see it in line, so you're not have to going, with the Optimizer, admittedly you do have to go into a PDF and then back into setup and back to the PDF. With Elements Cloud, it's right there. And there's a whole bunch of other features. This is a little bit newer tool. I'm still actually learning a lot about it, but it is pretty cool. The Config Workbook is another free tool out there. This is a great tool to help you kind of maintain and document your customizations over time. There's a couple of these tools that I'll talk about. One of the things that should come out of this first step of assessment is some sort of documentation of your org. We'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And then if you search on the AppExchange, you'll find a bunch of different tools. I searched Schema, which is actually a kind of interesting search on the AppExchange. Out of Schema, you get things like Schema Surfer, Org Dictionary, which is a great tool, again, for documentation, Schema Builder, Field Dumper, just a whole bunch of other tools out there that can help you kind of look at your org in different ways to help you make that assessment as to whether you need to keep customizations or mark customizations as being ready for deleted. So sum up here, there's a lot of tools out there to help you. Optimizer is a great kind of tool to get you started. Definitely look into the AppExchange. If you have some budget, there's some additional tools that you can use. And the cool things about these tools is don't just use them once. Don't just use the Optimizer once during the assessment, but keep using them and keep maintaining that documentation. So I also want to let you know there's actually some help that you can get from the Success Cloud. I work in platform success. I'm on the success team. And if you're a Premier Success customer, we can help you with your org cleanup. We've developed a number of programs for you where you can engage with our specialists one-on-one to help you kind of prioritize and review the technical debt in your org. We have the Org Health Assessment Accelerator. This is our most popular accelerator. It's been our most popular accelerator for over 4 years. It was actually, it was so popular we built the optimizer to help our specialists run the org health assessment. We have the code-based health assessment. If you need particular help with just your Apex in your org, the code-based health assessment can help you. We now have a Service Cloud health assessment. If you want to get really specific around what you need help with, Service Cloud is available to you. We have a number of automation tools accelerators, like our Business Process Assessment Accelerator, where we can review how you're using automation, workflow, process builder, flow in your org, and tell you, are you using the right tools? Do you need to deprecate some of the stuff you're doing? Enterprise Architecture Assessment goes really deep in looking at not just your Salesforce org, but the larger landscape of how you integrated it with your business systems. We have 20+ Lightning accelerators. I'm going to talk a little bit later about Lightning and how it can impact an org cleanup project, but I want to let you know that we have Lightning accelerators. And then also, as you're doing your assessment, you're probably going to find a lot of stuff that's going to be like repetitive tasks, like removing or reassigning roles, or deleting reports, or doing a whole bunch of just very repetitive stuff. Our Premier Support admin services are available to you. They do 100+ declarative changes, including updating page layouts, reports, and permissions. So if you can say, I need to either migrate all this stuff off onto, from profiles to permission sets, or I need to assign these permission sets, or I need to delete all these reports, you can actually request that Premier Admin Services does this work for you, so that way you can concentrate on the more complex stuff. So this is a great way to offload some of that admin work that you have to do as part of an org cleanup. So, as we come to the end of the assessment stage, what I want to kind of impart upon you is that you need to have some sort of documentation. I like to take the form of a data dictionary. The data dictionary can help track why a field, object, workflow, or any other customization exists. All right. Now, I don't care what you use. You can use that org dictionary tool that is free on the AppExchange. You can use an Excel spreadsheet. You can use Elements Cloud. You can use whatever you want. I don't really care, but you need to have some sort of documentation as you get to this end of this stage in the project in your assessment. All right. And the data dictionary should include some key things, right? It should include the business the business purpose. Why does this field exist? Why does this object exist? Why does this workflow exist? There's got to be a reason for it. All right. If you can't find a reason, probably a good indication that it might be time for that to be removed. Who requested it? This could be a person or a group. I tend to look at groups like sales operations or HR group, or whoever requested it, it should be marked with a group. When it was created or when it was requested, the last time it was verified. As you're doing this for the first time, this would be the time that it'll be verified, but you want to keep this documentation updated and maintained over time and check off your verifications. I like to look, I think good admins probably should review their orgs at least once a year to make sure that all the customizations they have are valid and exist. And then also the percentage of time used specifically for fields, it's really helpful. Now, I will say this is going to be a valuable tool for you, not just in this project, but going forward. It'll help you initially org, but going forward, it'll help you keep it maintained and keeping it optimized. Not only is it a valuable tool for admins, I've gone through a lot of projects where we built these tools, but I've had those customers come back to me over time and say that they've gone through this exercise and reported back. Now they use that data dictionary or that documentation as part of their end user training. So when new users come on board, they can use that data dictionary, reference that data dictionary, and understand what fields are, what objects are, and understand their usage. So that makes sure that you're using the fields properly. Also, you can consider leveraging a lot of different tools. But when you start doing your evaluation, a lot of time people ask me over and over, well, what is the right percentage of time a field should be used? And I don't think there's a really good necessarily answer that. So I came up with just a rule of thumb. If a field is being used, or a customization, or a field or an object being used less than 15% of the time, you should consider it for removal. Doesn't mean you remove it, you consider it for removal. What I like to do is, as I do my assessment and I look down my fields, any field that's used less than 15% of the time, I mark it and I review it with the business stakeholders and say, hey, this field's not really being used, do we still need it? Now, there are plenty of use cases where you have exception fields that are only used once in a while, but it's a really important exception. All right? Those fields will probably be used less than 50% of the time. Just document it and keep the field. Obviously, we shouldn't just delete it just because it's not being used. There are good business cases for having exception fields. Now, I will say that once you have this, this data dictionary, it does need to be maintained. So someone does have to be assigned to that, and you should have an admin who kind of owns that going forward. And but you should work with your business partners to make sure that they know, that this dictionary exists, and when things change, that it should be getting updated with each release. All right, so we've completed our assessment. Let's get into step 2 here, defining the corrective action. So you're going to determine how you're going to address your org's technical debt. Now, I've done this a lot of different ways for a lot of different customers, but I will break it down to basically 2 options that you have. All right? It's really an ongoing maintenance versus a re-implementation project. Now, an ongoing maintenance is usually the most preferred method. You basically keep the org moving forward, still adding new features while cleaning it up. But you're devoting a percentage of each release to clean up your work. I don't care if you're waterfall or agile, figure out a way to block out a certain percentage of every release to get to a cleanup. I recommend something in the 10 to 25% range, but if your org is really a mess and it's very brittle and it's actually impacting adoption or impacting your ability to deploy, you might want to increase that up to 50% for a few releases and then ratchet it back down. But going forward, you should always have at least 5 to 10% set aside for cleaning up. Every release should have a little bit of cleanup in it. All right? I would prioritize the most complex areas of technical debt first, and then create a backlog for other items. So you have those backlog items, and you can easily slot them into that percentage of every release. And if you need help offloading, don't forget about those Premier Admin services for those admin tasks. All right? That's typically the preferred method, the ongoing maintenance. The other option is a full re-implementation project. Now, I've been part of this a lot of times. This is where you pause new feature release, and you do a deep dive org analysis, you scope up what needs to be done, and you reconfigure the org using clicks over code. Now, this can be a really tough conversation to have with your business. They are not going to be they're not going to be open to maybe stopping new feature release to take 2 steps backwards to be able to take a step forward later on. So you do need to make sure you involve them, your business partners, in that type of decision if you feel like you need to go this route. All right? And when you think about your reconfiguring of the org, making sure that you're going more declaratively versus programmatically. We always say that any Salesforce project, 80% of it should be done declaratively. 20% of it should be done with using Apex and Lightning and Visualforce. All right? If your org is in a really horrible state, and you feel like almost nothing of it is useful or very little of it is useful, and there's not only bad metadata but bad data as well, there is an option available to you. You can start with a brand new org and say, hey, let's forget about all that old stuff and rebuild a new org for what we want to do. This can be very useful, especially in the cases where businesses have pivoted or have changed the way they sell or operate or have been acquired or have acquired other companies, and what they built 5 years ago is no longer even useful to them now. Now, this can be, again, a little bit longer of a project. You might have to migrate people and users, and you'll have to get a new org, and you will have to talk to your account executive, because there might be a cost as you switch over, but eventually you'll move all of your users over to the new org, and you'll decommission the old org. There have been many, many, many re-implementation projects that I started, and when we got to the end, we realized, hey, this would have been simpler to start with a net new org, so we deleted basically everything that was there before. Hindsight is 20/20, but I always like to put that there. That is an option for you. If you're going to go with a full re-implementation project, I would highly, highly recommend that you leverage either Salesforce's cloud services or our partner ecosystem. Our teams have done many, many, many re-implementation projects, so don't go it alone. Use one of these resources to you. Our partner ecosystem is incredible. They have done literally hundreds of thousands of re-implementation projects. So if you feel like your org is in this state and it really needs to be a complete re-implementation, do involve our partners with you so they can bring along those experiences they've had doing other org re-implementations. All right, something else I want to talk about when you think about kind of re-implementing your org or even doing a cleanup, Lightning can be an incredible catalyst for org cleanup. All right, Lightning is an opportunity to rethink your org and your applications from a user perspective. How many people here are on Lightning today? Oh, wow, okay, so a little bit more than a third. So for the remaining 2/3 of you, think about Lightning as a way to kind of clean up your technical debt, because you can move only features you need to Lightning and remove everything else that's inconsequential to the end users. All right? Companies that I've worked with have reported significant reduction in technical debt during the Lightning migration, And they can also you can also leverage something called the Lightning Readiness Report, which is kind of like the cousin of the Salesforce Optimizer. It gives you the same kind of report. Now it's focused on Lightning and Lightning available features. It'll let you know if there's a feature that you're using Classic that's not available in Lightning. It'll let you know what features you need to enable, or if you need to address something like JavaScript buttons. But it can also help identify technical debt. Now let's talk a little bit about the reduction of technical debt. I've actually, I kind of intuitively knew that Lightning can help with technical debt, but customers have been telling me it's not just it helps, Lightning literally can crush technical debt. This was something a customer gave us. I didn't ask for it, they just gave it to me. This is basically after they did their Lightning implementation project, they saw a significant reduction in their technical debt. 18 sharing roles to 2, 20 profiles to 10, 1,253 lines of Apex code down to 157 to create one case. And I think a lot of that was done using Flow now. So it's pretty incredible. And again, this was just volunteered to me. Another one that was volunteered to me, this one, 95% reduction in org-wide email addresses, 4% reduction in email alerts, record types reductions, roles and page layout reductions, 50% profile reductions. This is crazy. I mean, this was, again, these were companies that didn't necessarily set out to do a technical debt project. They actually set out to do a Lightning implementation or a Lightning migration project, and they actually crushed their technical debt as part of it. This is a quote that I had from one customer from our financial service industry. Combining a reduction in technical debt and migrating the Lightning experience into a signal initiative accelerated our transformation to a new enhanced platform. Basically, they wanted to do a technical debt re-implementation project, but they couldn't get budget. So they decided to combine it with Lightning migration, which they could get budget for, and they put it together into one project. And they actually were better off for it. So don't think that you have to do one before the other. I would definitely recommend putting them together. There might be a couple things that you can do, as far as cleaning up your technical debt before you go to Lightning. But if you can combine them together, you can actually show a lot of value to your end users and your business stakeholders. It's a great way to get some buy-in as well to help with, reduction in technical debt. Just to talk a little bit more about the Lightning Transition Toolkit. So there's a bunch of different tools for Lightning transitions. These tools not only help with Lightning transitions, but they can help with removing technical debt. So the Lightning Experience Readiness Check, I talked a little about that. The Lightning Experience Visual Force Check is a really good tool. It'll actually give you some statistics on how often your Visual Force pages are being used. That's great for migrating to Lightning, even better for addressing technical debt, because if your Visual Force pages aren't being used, why are they there? Get them out. There's also a couple other tools. The Magic Mover and the Lightning Configuration Converter can help move notes and attachments, and also move S controls and different types of buttons automatically. We talked about the Salesforce Optimizer. There's also the License Usage app, by the way. So once you move to Lightning, there is an app to help you with adoption. All right, so at the end of this step, you're going to think about what your project plan is. Now, this is a very kind of standard waterfall-ish project plan here. If you're agile, it might look a little different, but there's some key things you need to include in any project plan, whether you're waterfall or agile. Make sure you have a sponsor and key stakeholders. Don't go it alone. Make sure you have a champion that goes with you on this project. You might need some budget for the project. Have a communication plan. You're going to be changing stuff in Salesforce. You're going to be removing fields, you're going to be removing objects, removing tabs, apps, whatever it is. Make sure that you're communicating that to end users. The worst thing is an end user who just sees a change and doesn't know what it's about or why it happens. All right? Think about some of the skills and resources need. If you're an admin and there's a lot of Apex code and you need to get rid of that code, think about getting a developer to help you with that. You might need some solution technical designs, especially if you're going to be migrating to Lightning. You're going to need some new designs of how you're going to design your UI. You're going to want to prioritize your technical debt. I always prefer to go after the areas that are causing the most friction for my end users and my deployment team. What's your success definition and KPIs? There should always be KPIs in any project so that you know you're successful. One great KPI around adoption is if it takes 10 clicks and 5 minutes to enter an opportunity, by reducing the amount of fields and reducing the amount of steps, you can get it down to 2 clicks and 2 minutes to enter an opportunity. That's a great KPI to work towards. Training. If you're going to be significantly changing the system, you might need to update your training or create some training if there was no training previously. Blackout windows. There's a lot of times where we might remove a custom object or migrate data over. You might have 2 custom objects that are doing the exact same thing. You might need some blackout windows to migrate that data or remove stuff from the system. And then also keep in mind post-deployment support. All right? This is where you're going to be able to support your end users after you deploy, or in this case, remove stuff from your org. All right, last step, step 3, execute on your plan. So you take your plan, you execute on. Here's some things to keep in mind when you put your plan into action. Always start your development in the sandbox, right? Never do anything in production. Always start in the sandbox. Back up your data and your metadata before making changes, okay? You're going to be removing metadata, all right? Make sure you back that up so you can bring it back if you need to. Make sure you do proper regression testing. Removing metadata may cause issues. You might have things that have referenced that metadata in Apex code or Visualforce page or JavaScript. Or you might have integrated apps. I'm sure a lot of you have stuff that's integrated with Salesforce. Now, you might not be using a custom field, but an integration might depend on that custom field. It might expect that custom field to be there, and when it goes to query Salesforce, it doesn't get that custom field, Salesforce throws an error, your integration breaks. So make sure that you're testing your integrations too. Also keep in mind for your admins out there, you can't remove metadata through change sets. All right? You will have to go into setup and kind of manually remove the metadata. If you're a developer and you're familiar with the metadata API, you can use something called the destructivechanges.xml file in most cases. It can't remove all types of metadata, but standard pieces of metadata like fields and profiles, it can be removed using a destructivechanges.xml file. Develop a communication plan to keep end users informed, and consider restricting access to customers using profiles and field level security before they're moved. I actually have a very specific blog post about this. It actually brings you through a decommissioning process. There's a great kind of tips and tricks on how to decommission something. I always like to hide it from everybody. So if I have a field that I'm thinking about removing, I hide it from everybody. I don't remove the field. I use field level security, I use profiles, and I hide it. And then I monitor it for a while, 30, 60, 90 days. See if anybody or any integration had come in, see if anybody ran into my office with their hair on fire, say, where's my custom field? And then once you're comfortable, X number of days later, then remove it. This blog post actually goes through not just removing fields, but any other type of customization. You can make triggers inactive, you can make workflows inactive. It's a great way to kind of, as a small step, to move before removing it. That way, if someone comes in and their hair's on fire, all you got to do is go back into field level security, check a box, and it's back, and nobody was the wiser. Roles and profiles, when you do some cleanups on roles and profiles, there's some special considerations, and actually it can be really easy to do it. So I have some detailed processes for cleaning up roles. I have a couple different options here with you can kind of clean it up in place, or you can create a new role hierarchy and migrate it. It can help you kind of speed that up. Roles specifically can be problematic, and they tend to be an area of a lot of technical debt. That's why we created a separate blog post just for that. All right, so some key takeaways as we wrap up here. One, make sure you're following the 3-step process: assess, plan, execute. Run the Salesforce Optimizer. Again, if you don't do anything else after leaving the session today, make sure you run that Salesforce Optimizer before you leave the Bay Area today, so that way tomorrow morning you get to take a look and see what your results are. All right, there's actually a trail on Salesforce Optimizer you can find on Trailhead. Just go to trailhead.com and search for Optimizer. You want to know a little bit more about Optimizer, all that information is right there. Create a data dictionary for your org, some of your documentation. This is going to be helpful for your assessment, but it'll also be helpful for you to maintain your org going forward, and also will be helpful for your end users to understand what everything is in your org. Think about Lightning as an opportunity to rethink and clean up. Great pairing of projects, Lightning and re-implementation projects. There's as you would imagine, a trailhead for a Lightning experience rollout. I would highly recommend that when you're thinking about moving towards Lightning. Divide up your technical debt into different areas to help prioritize. You can push easy stuff to admin services. More complex stuff might need to go to developers or partners. I like to address the worst areas of technical debt if they're impacting adoption. Right? If your end users can't use the system because there's 500 fields in an opportunity and they have no idea what to fill in, that's a big problem. Right? So I would address that area first before I address other areas, and then I would backlog everything else. Make sure you put aside a percentage of time in each release goes to maintaining and cleaning up. This shouldn't just be part of this project. After you're done cleaning up, you shouldn't get rid of that percentage. Keep that percentage around, because with every release, there's going to be some cleanup. And we're adding new features all the time. 3 times a year, Salesforce is adding new features. There's probably going to be opportunities for you to deprecate customizations you created in favor of now out-of-the-box solutions and features we have. So that's why you want to keep that 5% around. Also to make sure that your org is being properly maintained over time. And I don't want you, a year from now, to be back in my same session talking about how to declutter your org yet again. All right, so that's my session. Thank you very much. We have a few minutes. I'd love to take some questions from the audience. And I'll throw out my information. Thank you. If anybody has any questions, we got a microphone right there. You're more than welcome to step up and ask me some questions. Or keep eating your lunch, either one. So this is a good question about one of the easiest ways to create a dictionary. One of the easiest ways is simply to do a spreadsheet or use something like Field Trip and download the reports it creates, and that's like a great start.
So I have a question. Is this cleanup can be done per application, not per org?
Oh, that's a great question. The question is, can a cleanup be done per application, not necessarily per org? It's a little bit harder to do it per application, to be honest with you, because the concept of an application in Salesforce is just a bunch of tabs. It's just a group of tabs, and a tab could be in one application or another. So,
Profiles assigned.
right, you have profiles assigned to that, and you have permission sets. So what you would need to kind of do is look at every customization and somehow manually tag it with an application. Like a workflow has no concept of an application, right? So where a custom object could be in multiple applications. So it's a little bit more work, and you kind of got to do it on the manual side, to be honest with you. Yeah, we're actually working on a way with Optimizer to be able to run Optimizer on a specific app. That's a forward-looking statement. We're not there yet. Cool. Cool. Other questions? Yeah. What?
The summary.
Oh, the summary side? Sure. It's not going backwards. I can't get it to go backwards. Oh, there we go. Key takeaways. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Some of the stuff you find during your cleanups, your typical issues,
Mm-hmm.
do you feed that to the product team? Because, like, for example, one reason because why there's so many custom fields is because there's no ability to do record-specific, record-type-specific labeling.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, for this record type, the partner account is called partner. For this one, it's called SI. For this one, it's called distributor. And some people create 3 fields for that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Questions around, if you could have, we try to feedback, any feedback we get, we try to feedback to the product team. Having record type specific labeling for a field, as I know something they've heard over time, but there's an idea, I believe, out in the AppExchange for it. It's just a matter of it it matters if it just gets enough amount of votes for them to pay attention to it.
So you talked about like if we move out to Lightning, then there is an opportunity we'll be reducing the profile.
Mm-hmm.
So
Well, so the question is around if you move to Lightning, there's an opportunity to reduce profiles. There's an opportunity, but it doesn't mean that's going to be the reality. What we find with profiles, especially over time, is they keep growing and growing, and no one ever deletes old profiles. So as part of a Lightning migration project, when you have to go update your permissions for Lightning, you can take that time to reevaluate your profiles, and you might be able to remove some. In fact, you might be able to compare them. That Salesforce Toolkit for Salesforce, I believe, had a profile comparer in there. Really helpful tool to see, hey, are these two profiles basically the same? Let's move them together. Which definitely happens, especially when you have a lot of admins in the org. Cool. Sure.
Roles a mess because of customer portal.
Yes.
Creates like 3 roles for every.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any tips on how to work with that?
Yeah, so the question about roles for communities that
Yes.
create 3. Do I have any tips for working on that? No, I do not. In fact, my role blog post that I put out there actually says this is for internal roles only, because those roles can't be deleted.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's something that, again, I would love our product team to work on. I don't work on the product team, unfortunately. Yeah.
Thank you. This is a great presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll go over here.
We're in round 4. Got a false start. Getting ready to start.
Yeah.
Vendor want to burn the whole thing down. Ask everybody, not just people like you.
Yeah.
You talked about everyone said no.
Who's everybody?
So sales rep and anyone I've talked to around here.
Wow. We've done it a couple of different times. There might be a cost to it. I would talk to your account executive and say, we really need to do this. It's going to impact our adoption. And they should be really receptive with that.
Can I have her reach out to you?
Yeah, that's my contact information right there. That's my email and Twitter. So yeah, feel free to reach out to me. We've definitely done it before. Yeah. Cool.
You have a note on one of your slides
Mhm.
about percentage of time
Yeah.
release on cleanup.
Yeah.
Do you have a best practice on how much time to spend in preparing for each release?
Well, it depends on, so the question is around, do I have time on, like how much time should be spent on every release? Depends on what your release schedule. Are you doing releases every 2 weeks, every quarter? Like the bigger releases, you're going to need to spend more time. Um,
I thought you were talking about Salesforce.
Oh, no, I'm talking about your release schedule. Yeah, you should have a percentage of time with each of your releases dedicated to cleanup, not our releases. Yeah, because you don't release necessarily on our schedule.
Then you should have a sign-off sheet which includes what you believe has to be done before you can release around documentation.
Yeah, I like that idea.
So you can't release unless you've got certain things done.
Mm-hmm.
So at least object level documentation or every workflow.
Yeah, requiring documentation as part of a release. That would be great if we could include that instead of like just like the Apex lines covered, test lines covered.
Yeah, we do report on that.
Yeah, cool. Alex?
How did those people remove so many record types switching to Lightning?
They were simply not being used, and they didn't need, because record types were kind of driving the layout, and what they found is that they didn't need all that customization. And they really could get away with just 2 or 3 record types with slightly different layouts using Lightning and tabs and everything else. A lot of that had to do, I think, with how they ordered the fields, and it's because they had so many fields.
So some of it just they could have done without Lightning anyway.
Probably,
They bundled it in that way.
probably, but it was, yeah, they just bundled it in. I'm actually at time. I got to get off the stage, but I'll come down and talk to you guys.